Tonight, the topic is an introduction about Hebrew, about the concept of Hebrew, as the Kabbalists believed that this is the formative language of the universe. But before we go into Hebrew, I would like to talk a little bit about linguistics in general, to give you a taste of what does linguistics, the study of the spoken language of human beings, what does that mean? So, in honor for that, we'll talk about Ferdinand de Saussure. Saussure is the father of modern linguistics. He's the one who created, from his thoughts, structuralism comes to exist and becomes a school of thought which actually revolutionized philosophy in this 20th century. Okay, so he's the father of 20th century linguistics. And let's learn a little bit about his foundational thoughts, how he understands language. And hopefully, once we understand that, we can relate to how the Kabbalists understood Hebrew to be. Okay, he never wrote a book. He gave classes in Geneva between 1906 and 1911, and from the notes of his classes, they wrote a book which is the foundational book on linguistics called The Course in General Linguistics. And what he says is language is semiology. Does anybody know what semiology is? It's the study of symbols. Is how to study language. It's not the words of spoken language. Language is how we relate to reality. We conceptualize by thinking in a verbal form. So language is way beyond words, way beyond the spoken word, is the concept of symbols and signs. And he says the following: there is a concept called a sign. What is the sign? The sign is the junction between a signifier and a signified. And you should remember this. So there are no words. There's no spoken word. There's no language. It's all signs. And you see that that becomes the basis of structuralism. And what it is there is a signifier, something that signifies something else, that allows you to relate. And there is a signified, which the signifier points to. Because the only way we can communicate with each other is if we can understand each other. We have to have something in common. So the world is full of signs, which means signified, things that you're trying to represent, concepts, and ways to relate to that concept, to let you point you out, to tell you if I speak about a tree, I want you to understand that I mean something called a tree. So the tree here is the signified, and the signifier is the word tree. And that's how, what it does, it allows us to, instead of having to describe what a tree is and what I understand it to be, I can use one signifier to get your attention and to convey a message. So all of language is the junction between the signified and the signifier. Now, this is how he builds language. So there are no words, there's a signified and a signifier. Now, the rule of arbitrariness. Says Ferdinand de Saussure, there is a rule called arbitrariness. In other words, how does the little tree connect to the word tree? Is anything intrinsic into it? So he says no. The signifier and the signified are connected by an arbitrary choice. He says societies will never know how did that come into place. But there was an arbitrary, there's nothing intrinsic. And he says, you know why? Because you could have represented a tree by any other word. You could have called it a cow. Now, why do we call a tree a tree? Who knows? But I'll tell you why. Because look at the different languages. There's so many languages. If there will be anything intrinsic between a language, a signifier, and the signified, you would have to have a universal term for it. So therefore, there's nothing intrinsic. There's no natural connection between a signifier and a signified. Now, when Saussure did this, he was speculating about words that exist already in society, that we couldn't go. There is a science called etymology. Etymology, you try to find out of how words came to being. And sometimes you just have to guess. But now, since we live now in the 21st century. In the 21st century, we can actually experience the creation of new words. And you see how words came to being. Can anybody think about a word that was created in our lifetimes?
Internet.
The internet or the web. So probably in 1,000 years, people are going to think, why the heck it's called the web? But there's nothing intrinsic of a web. The reason why you call it a web or the internet is because because we have so many computers connected. So if you look at the connection between the different computers, it actually looks like a web. It's nothing intrinsic as a web. We could have called anything else. So there is some kind of a trace or some kind of a reason why words connect, the signifiers connect to the signifieds, but there's nothing intrinsic. And so on and so forth. And now today we see, as you see words develop through some kind of a creative connection, and that stays. And so there's the word web, which is an English word, is used in Israel. People will say the web, even though the web does not mean a web in Hebrew. So words start with some kind of a loose connection, but they end up in places without having any connection, being completely arbitrary. So c'est ce soir, the words start with some kind of a partial arbitrary choice, and they become completely arbitrary throughout the usage of time and spatial distance, when you go and you are far away. Second rule, and there are many more rules there. I'm just choosing from his general course of language, of linguistics, the rules which I think are very interesting for us to understand and to go forward in our course. The material representation of the sign. When you write letters, we write words, and we take words and we represent them through letters. We actually write them, not only voice them and speak them, we actually create a material representation. The signs used are arbitrary also. That a T looks like a T has nothing intrinsic to it. You could have a T look like an R, and that would have been fine also. The value of the letters is purely negative and differential. The only connection of the T, that we have the T connecting to the actual T, is because by having a T, I exclude any other letters. What it does, it excludes everything else. But there's nothing intrinsic in the material representation of the words. So the words are arbitrary, and how we represent the words is arbitrary also. So it comes out this is a pure human invention and human creativity to create language. Now, once this is understood, it became a huge debate in American schools of how do you teach language? Do you teach whole words or you teach phonics? When you look at the word tree and you want to teach a child, do you teach it as a whole word, tree, or do you actually spell it out? T is T-R-E-E, giving value to each one of the letters. In other words, are letters building blocks of words? What's primary? We have words and we have letters. What's primary and secondary? Who is the tail and who is the dog, and does it really matter? Okay, whole language is top down. You take words, and from the word, they're primary. Now, we needed to express words with some material representation, so we use letters. So you go from words to letters. And that's one way of teaching language. And then there is phonics. Phonics is teaching the opposite. You go bottoms up. You look at the T, you teach a child the T, you teach the R, and teach the E, and you teach the E, you put it all together, say, okay, you learn the T, the R, and the E, and two E's. How does it come all together? And this is, you see the child here? This is the biggest difficult step of how to teach children. You know why? Because in English, if you just teach letters, phonics, you speak a language which is very close to English, but ain't English. Because in English language, we have many, many exceptions. So many times you could put letters together, they'll sound one way, and in a different format, for some arbitrary reason, will sound differently. So Dutch teaching bottoms up won't work. But teaching top down, you have to make children memorize so many words. Every school, let me ask you something, survey, how many people remember how they learned language here? Does anybody remember? It wasn't so long ago. A lot longer for me, but not as long for you. Who learned whole words? Huh? You learned whole language? Okay. Who learned phonics? Okay. On the radio, they actually, if you ever realize, in the radio, they sell this phonics because they're very big fans of phonics. For some reason, it's easier to teach, and they say that you can actually learn better. This is it. So those are the three issues in regular linguistics and language. How does Hebrew relate to it? So the language of Hebrew, we believe, is extremely special. And the ones who dedicated a lot of work and effort into understanding the language of Hebrew are the Kabbalists. And the Kabbalah is the book that's written about Hebrew. One of the original works of Kabbalah is a book called Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah means the book of creation. The book of creation is an ancient book of Kabbalah that it's attributed to no one other than the forefather of the Jewish people. Who is the forefather of the Jewish people? Not all of the Jewish people, of the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims. Abraham, right? So it's attributed that Abraham was the one who wrote this book. And this book deals of how the world was created. Kabbalistically speaking, what is the master plan of the creation of the universe? And Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation, starts with the following premise. The world was created with 32 paths of wisdom. Now, the 32 paths of wisdom, Abraham says in his book of creation, where does he see 32 in creation? Because there are 32 times the name of God, the Elohim, in the first chapter of Genesis. When it talks about creation, it has 32 times the name Elohim, which represents the 32 paths of divine wisdom that brought about the reality of the world. Says Sefer Yetzirah. This is, by the way, from the web. If you probably have a better copy. And this is on the web, the 32 paths of wisdom. Now, what are the 32 paths of wisdom? Says Sefer Yetzirah, they are the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and the 10 numbers. The 10 numbers and the 22 letters are the basic building blocks of all of creation. And they are the 32 paths of God's wisdom, that with that, the world was created. So you see all the alphabet, and here is those sphirot which represent the 10 numbers. Says Sefer Yetzirah, the most basic building blocks of reality are the Hebrew letters. So if you have a question in Hebrew, is it whole language or is it phonics? There is no question and no debate. Sefer Yetzirah says the building blocks are the letters. Words are just combinations and permutations of letters. Says Sefer Yetzirah, 2 letters create 2 words. And 3 letters create 2 times 2 times 2. And so on, the exponential numbers. The building blocks of creation are the letters. Says Sefer Yetzirah, they are the vessels of divine energy. Divine energy flows through and materializes and becomes translated into concepts through the Hebrew letters. And the letters are therefore primary. In Hebrew, that's why some people today try to teach Hebrew using whole language. And that's according to the Kabbalists, that's a capital mistake. Because words are nothing but combinations of letters. Now, how do you know what the letters mean? How do we know what's the divine energy behind the letters? So the Kabbalists give us 4 hints. There are 4 ways of understanding the hidden meaning of a letter. And that's how we understand. The first thing is, you look for the first mention in the Torah as the beginning of a root word. If you want to know some kind of an idea of the power of the letter, you look at the letter where it shows up the first time in the Bible, in the Pentateuch, at the beginning of a root word. And the reason why it's a root word, because it's not prepositions. If they are prepositions, forget about it. You look at the word at the beginning of the root word. The second thing is the name of the letter indicates its power. An aleph is called an aleph, not just arbitrarily. The aleph represents the power of the aleph. And we'll soon see, hopefully today, hopefully we'll be able to give you a taste of what it means. The second thing is, says Sefer Yetzirah, the 32 paths of wisdom, which is 22 letters and 10 numbers, are interconnected. Because every letter has a numerical value. And if you want to get an inkling of the power of the letter, you try to see the number associated to the letter. And the number 4, the material representation. The picture of the letter tells you a lot about it. So using 1, 2, or 3 of these ideas, you can get what the letter means. And Sefer Yetzirah says the letters are open for all of us. It's not only Kabbalistically, you need to be a trained Kabbalist to get an idea, but the Hebrew language has so many layers that they are accessible to us. And this is how we get to know. Now, these are the Hebrew letters. Okay? And if you want to know, we just said the following. One of the signs is looking for the first time they appear in the Bible. I did not put it here, but you'll learn hopefully through Rabbi Zalman and through maybe tonight to see what is the first place that each letter shows up in the Pentateuch. But here are the Hebrew names of the letters. Aleph is called an Aleph, Bet, the Lamed. The Hebrew name of the letter gives you an inkling of its power. The second thing is the numerical value. Every letter has a number associated with it. And you have, by the way, everybody has a handout, you have the numerical table. And that numerical table gives you a very strong indication of the power of the letter. And this is what's called the material representation of the letter. This is the form of the letter. You should know that this is a tradition from Sinai. And when you write the Sefer Torah, the scribe has to be trained in writing the letters. And any minute change in the shape of the letter invalidates the book and invalidates your tefillin. And this is the material representation. As you'll see, this material representation gives you an inkling of the power and the meaning of the letter. Okay? You have it in front of you. We are going to do an exercise and to apply our knowledge to understand a word. We're going to break it into letters, and we'll try to apply what we've learned to actually decipher the meaning and the power of a word. Okay? The letter Zayin. So the letter Zayin, I'm going to use 2 of our indications to try to understand it. What is the first? By the way, the Zayin has something called the Tagin. The Tagin are the crowns above the letters. Not all of the Hebrew letters have crowns. There is Shatnes Gats. There is a few letters which have crowns on top of them called the Tagin. The Zayin is one of these letters. The letter Zayin, can anybody guess what is the first place that the Zayin shows up in the Pentateuch at the beginning of a root word? Is the word Zera, the word seed. Zera, seed, is the Zayin. And you know what the word Zayin, when I talk about Zayin, what does Zayin mean? Zayin means a weapon. In Hebrew, Zayin is clay Zayin, is a weapon. So the Zayin is considered by the Kabbalists to be the male letter. Why the male? Because the male is the one who goes to fight. He goes to conquer. That's why the Zayin is represented. And the Zayin represents the seed. Because if you look, forget about the male being a man or a woman. But in the male-female relationship, there is the concept that the male is the one that gives the potential. He gives that potential. So he gives the seed. So the Zayin is called the male letter. Represents Zayin means a weapon, the idea of conquering, of going to battle. And it means a seed. The letter Gimel, which also has a crown, The letter Gimel, the first place where it says is the word Gdolim, the great. The first place it says Hagda Meorot Hagdolim. The beginning of the root word is Gimel Gadol, great. So the Gimel represents Gimel, greatness. Fits well, right? Gimel and greatness. Now, let's follow. What does the word Gimel mean? Can anybody think Gimel is Gimel Mem Lamed? What can that mean? Does anybody have any meaning? This is a word that has 3 meanings, at least. Could be more. The word Gimel. A camel, excellent. A camel is a gamal, excellent. What else? Good. We have 1 out of the 3. What else does a Gimel mean? Has anybody heard of the, yes? Excellent. I was going to ask. Perfect. Gemilut Hasadim. You know what does Gemilut Hasadim mean? Giving kindness. So the word of Gemilut, which means Geligmol, Gomel Leish Chesed Kimifalo, means to give, to bestow. To bestow kindness is called Gemilut Hasadim. So now we know a camel, and bestowing, giving, means Gimel also. There's a third meaning, and the third meaning is not very popular, but it's one of the peculiarities of the Hebrew language that many words share meanings which are opposites to each other. Antonyms share the same word. The word Gimel means also to stop giving. Let me give you an example. When it says, Vaigdal hayeled vaigamal, when it says by Isaac, when he grew, and he didn't have to be nursed anymore, he didn't have to be given anymore, that's called Gemilah. Gemilah means when you stop. By the way, in modern Hebrew, if somebody is actually addicted to alcohol, is an alcoholic, and he decides to stop being dependent on alcohol, becoming independent, it means Gemilah. Gemilat Samim, if a person is addicted to drugs, and he stops his dependency, it's called Gemilah. So Gemilah means to a camel, it means to bestow, it means independence, or stop being dependent. If I ask you, what these 3 words have in common, they appear to be, at least, to give and to be independent appears to be separate and different, or at least maybe even antonyms. And what does a camel have to do with anything? And what does he have to do with the word Gedolim? Anybody? Yes? Yes. What? To the camel.
The camel doesn't need water, so you don't have to give it water.
Absolutely. Very good point, because a camel is independent. So it shares the independence, because it could live 40 days without water. It could drink enough water for 40 days. So there is a good sharing point. Excellent. But let me tell you something. This is called the female word letter. By the Kabbalists, the Gimel is called the female letter, not because, even because what it is the letter of nurturing. The reason why the first place in the Bible, the word Gadol starts with a Gimel, because Gadol is something great. And what the Gimel does, it allows something to become great, which means in good Hebrew to nurture something. It's the letter of nurturing, of allowing something to become great. And what it means is the nurturing, because you give and you nourish it. But in concept of giving, in Hebrew and in Jewish thought, you know what is the greatest form of giving? The Maimonides counts 7 levels of giving. You know what the greatest form of giving is? Is making somebody independent. Making somebody into a gadol. The camel represents that. The camel is an animal that drinks, but he drinks enough to allow himself to be independent. The reason why the word gimel means to give and to stop giving, give and independence, is because the ultimate giving is the form of independence. In Jewish law, it translates into Jewish practice and law. Maimonides says, what's greater, to give somebody charity or to actually hire somebody to do a job that you actually need? You'd think, listen, it's much better to be altruistic and just give charity, something that you don't care, you don't need. But if you just give charity, the person will always be dependent on you. If instead of giving him charity, you give him a job, you are making him independent. That's Gimel. The nurturing of a mother, the nurturing of the female, is taking and nurturing enough the child to be on his own. If you only nurture the child and you turn it dependent onto you, that's not giving. The giving is making him independent. And that's represented by the Gimel. By the way, this is how God relates to us. God is the ultimate kindness. And you know what was the ultimate kindness that he did for us? He could have sent us to this world and said, you know something, guys? Just enjoy. That would have been great. Just enjoy. Have a good time. And instead of us, God gave us a Bible with 613 commandments that is a great form of enjoyment, but requires commitment. Why did he do this? Why didn't he just create the people and say, you know something, I'm creating you now, just do whatever you want? Because in that case, we'd be always dependent on him. Because we didn't deserve. He didn't create the concept of desert. Desert, which is deserving, requires us to actually deserve something, to become independent. Because the ultimate act of kindness is not just giving, but giving in a way to turn us independent. This is the Gimel, this is the female world. Now, if you want to put two things together, how do you connect in Hebrew? What's the connecting word or the connecting letter in Hebrew? Can anybody tell me? If you want to connect, let's say you have this and you have that, and you want to put a letter to connect the two together. Is the letter Vav. Now, why is the letter Vav? The letter Vav, what is the first place where the letter Vav appears? Not as a preposition, but the beginning of a root word. Can anybody guess? Where does it say the first place in the Bible, in the Pentateuch, is not in Genesis? It's only in Exodus that says that the letter Vav, not as a preposition, but as a root word. There's only one word in Hebrew that the letter Vav forms a word. You know what word it is? Is the word? No, and is a preposition, right? It's a conjunction. Conjunction prepositions is not it's all of them are, in other words, you need a root word, and a word on its own. You know what it is? Is the word Vav. Vav in Hebrew means a word which means a hook. So I think it means a hook. A hook. A hook is a Vav. In the building of the temple, there were hooks to put things together. So there was a Vavim. Vavim Lamudim. So the Vav is not only a conjunction and a preposition. A Vav means a hook, because that's what a Vav does. A Vav connects. If you look at the Vav is a line to connect two things together. So Vav means that. So Vav, the letter Vav, means a hook. And the first place in the Bible was mentioned, not only the first place, but the only place which is mentioned as a word, not as a preposition or conjunction, is the word Vav, which means a hook. So now, if I want to describe a couple, how is the word put together? How do you create a couple? Zayin is the male, is the seed giver. Gimel is the one who nurtures, who develops, so it's called the female. Vav puts it all together. How is a couple in Hebrew? Zug. And that's the next word. This is the word Zug. Zayin, Vav, and Gimel. One of the beauties of the Hebrew language. The word Vav is the only word in the alphabet which reads not only word, a few more, I misspoke, is one of the letters which reads both ways. Vav is two Vavs. The word Vav means Vav, Vav. Why does the Vav have this characteristic that can be read both ways? Yes, sorry.
Is the word for couple or relationship?
Relationship, couple, doubles. Whenever you have two items which are complementary to each other, that actually work in conjunction, it's called a zug. If you have scissors, in Hebrew, scissors are called zug shel misparayim. Because they work in tandem, they are called a zug shel misparayim. When you have a bell is called a zag. It's called a zug. You know why? Because a bell has two components that need to work in tandem. So therefore, it's called a zug. So zug is a pair on two things, not just together, but they interact, they work in conjunction with each other. It's a partnership, there's a give and take. Vav represents that. Vav reads both ways. Because the only time you can connect in a zug is if there is an exchange both ways. If you just give, that's not a relationship. It has the give and take. That's why the Vav is that letter that has both sides of it. Is Vav, is give and take. The Kabbalists say something. The Hebrew language was created by letters, and therefore it's a formative language. It's not like Sesor. It's not arbitrary. Not only is not arbitrary, the language is primary. The Hebrew language, different than any other language, the Kabbalists believed that the language created conceptual reality and not vice versa. As much as Sesur will say that the language represents the sign of conceptual reality, the Kabbalists say we don't believe in the Hebrew language that. They are the vessels of God's energy, so they are formative. The language, the words create conceptual reality. And therefore, if you want to know the reality of something, analyze its word by breaking it into letters. So a zag, you look exactly, you want to know what is a couple. How does a couple function? How do we make a couple? You look at the word zug. You look at the zayin one. There are, first of all, different functions, but the different functions work in conjunction. They give and take. That's zug. By understanding the Hebrew word, you understand the conceptual reality. And therefore, once that is the case, from the Hebrew language, you could understand reality, and not vice versa. Hebrew words came into existence well before we knew reality. And once you know the Hebrew word, you knew reality. The word ozen, Aleph, Zayin, Nun, has two meanings. It means what? It means hearing, and it means balance. Right? So it has a double meaning, hearing and balance. I can guarantee you that throughout the last 3,000 years, people had no clue why in the world the word hearing and balance share the same Hebrew word. But they understood that they must have something very deep in common. As does anybody know why the two today, in the 21st century, the 20th century, why the two share the same word? Because the hearing comes from the balance. But not only that, in conceptual thinking is also, when you hear something, you could give certain weight. You can never, there's nothing better than understanding, than hearing, to be able to weigh, to be able to balance it out. And in physical reality. So here is the properties of Hebrew. In Hebrew, what the Kabbalists say is the following. You can create reality by manipulating the Hebrew language, and you could understand reality by understanding the language. So you can create. The Kabbalists were known, we all know the story of the golem. The golem is a Frankenstein kind of a inanimate that was created and turned into a human being, not a human being, but a humanoid. Now, if it's real or not, that happened in Prague in the 16th century, we don't know, but the Talmud does describe that such activity took place in the Talmudic times 2,000 years ago. That they will be able to take inanimates and turn them into moving or acting beings. How did they do this? By this genetic engineering. How was it done? According to Kabbalists, it was done by the manipulation and the permutation of the letters, because the letters create reality. Now, we can do that. We could try, but I would not suggest people should try creating reality by manipulating words and letters. But one thing I can tell you, that is very clear that we can understand reality by understanding the Hebrew language. I'm going to give you just 2 more lessons, and hopefully you'll be able to learn from Rabbi Zalman, and you'll explore, because I think the fascinating part of Hebrew is that we can understand reality, conceptual reality, by understanding Hebrew. The word nachem. The word nachem has a double meaning. What is the double meaning? It means regret. Nichamti ki asitim. If you do something and you regret for having done, is the word nachem. When God regretted that he created Adam, he says, Nichamti ki asitim. When the prophets describe somebody that did a lot of sins, and he regretted for his misbehavior, he says, Ki acharei shuvi nichamti. But nachem also means consolation. When you go to console somebody who's sitting shiva, what is that called in Hebrew? That's called nichum avelim. It's the consolation of the mourners. What does the word consolation and the word regret have in common? So our sages explain that the shared perspective is both of them mean, the word nachem means a change in perspective. You only regret because you change your mind. The ultimate consolation is that we believe that what looks terrible, what looks sorrowful today, one day God will give us a chance to change our perspective of what has happened. The ultimate consolation is that what appears to be evil and suffering is one perspective. But we believe that God will change our perspective. So therefore, when you go to give consolation, I always go to myself and say, listen, you go, somebody just had a terrible tragedy happen to him, and you go to give consolation. And sometimes I go and I watch people think that the idea of consolation is actually getting the mourner to distract. You think it's distraction to talk about the Super Bowl and about the ads in the Super Bowl. They think the idea is to distract, and the halacha is not like that. When you go to console somebody, you're not supposed to distract his mind. You're supposed to give nechama, which is consolation. What is consolation? It's to give him the trust, the belief, and the encouragement to know that one day God will show a different perspective. Because God is kind. And even though in this world it appears to be suffering, we know that one day this perspective of this world will be regretted for. So the ultimate consolation is the belief in the ultimate regret. And therefore the word consolation and regret share the same Hebrew word. Now the word hoda. The word hoda also has a double meaning. It means to acknowledge. When you go ahead and you acknowledge, you accept, you give in, it's called hoda. And the word hoda also means to thank. What is the shared meaning between thanking and acknowledging? Because the shared meaning is that the ultimate recognition, the ultimate thanking is recognition. Just to say thanks means nothing. The ultimate thanking is recognition. You know, we have a prayer that we say in every time there is a miracle, we say a prayer of thanking to God, the highest form of prayer, which is called the Hallel. Hallel means that we praise God and we thank Him for having done good things for us. In the middle of the Hallel, you know what we say? Ana Hashem Hoshina. God, please save me. Please rescue me. You ask God to rescue us. What does it have to do with thanking? But the thanking, the ultimate thanking is the recognition that we're helpless without Him. To thank somebody without acknowledging means nothing. It's a very shallow expression. The reason why the word thanking and the word acknowledging share the same root according to the Kabbalists is because it's teaching us what real thanks is. Thanking is acknowledging, is recognizing, is understanding dependency. So this is the lesson of tonight. This is an introduction of the importance of Hebrew. According to the Kabbalists, Saussure is right about every language, which is human language. The difference is that Hebrew is divine language. It's not only divine language, it's an expression of divine thought and divine volition. And they come expressed in the powers of letters. And therefore, it's not only that it's not arbitrary, but language is primary. We don't have concepts signified and signifiers. That's the word of Saussure. We believe that there is a sign. the signifier is the signified. The letters are reality. We live in verbal worlds, and it's a verbal expression of God. And therefore, if we want to understand reality, we could experiment, we could create, and we could think. But more important, we can understand the language. And therefore, learning Hebrew, it's such an important and such a fascinating and such an interesting endeavor. Because by learning Hebrew, we learn reality. Exploring the language, you understand what the world is all about. And the idea is we learn from words, and then we go to the building blocks, which are the letters. And you realize that in Hebrew, once you understand the letters, you could manipulate the letters and come up to what reality ought to be. And I think the lessons that we can learn from Hebrew can carry us forever. So my wish to all of you is that take this opportunity to learn Hebrew, to learn the Holy Tongue. Because this is not learning a new language, it's learning the ultimate language. But it's not only learning the ultimate language, it's learning the meaning and the ultimate meaning of reality. Have a good evening. If anybody has any questions, I'm here. Thank you.